What is Quanta? Quanta is math and programming courses for school students, but I will start from Kharkiv.
You're hearing the voice of a young female mathematician, Yulia Zdanovskaya, who died in Kharkiv, Ukraine, in the beginning of March.
So, I started doing math, additional to the school.
This podcast is usually aired in Russian, but this time we decided to do a full translation. This episode is very special. We usually talk about important scientific discoveries and people who make them, but today's episode is about Yulia's life and her tragic death. I had the privilege to talk to her friends and colleagues, mathematicians and computer scientists. I wanted to find out what her life was like and what she gave it up for. I thought that it is a story that everyone needs to hear, so here's an English version. Also, today, May 4th, is her 22nd birthday, so it's probably a good day to remember her. Welcome to the Naked Mole Red podcast. It's a podcast by Liba Liba Studio. I'm your host, Ilya Kolmanovsky. Hello.
My name is Alina Yan. Currently I'm in Prague studying mathematics in Charles University.
Alina Yan grew up in the village Prilimanskaya, near Odessa. As a secondary school student, she participated in various math competitions. In the spring of 2014, Alina received an acceptance letter from a well-known boarding school based in Kyiv. The 14-year-old Yulia Zdanovskaya from Kharkiv received a similar letter.
When we were 14, our future school, Ukrainian Physics and Mathematics Lyceum, sent people who did Olympiads in math, physics or informatics. They sent letters.
For Yulia, this was the first paper letter she has ever received, so she kept saying it was like a letter from Hogwarts. And to both girls, the school actually was like Hogwarts. Only students that were gifted in math and physics studied and also lived there, a very uncommon thing for Ukraine. Already at the Lyceum, in the beginning of the first year, Alina won a prestigious math competition. She was approached by a girl with fiery red hair who won the second prize.
I remember it very well. There was the first Olympiad in our Lyceum, and the problems were actually very easy. So I solved everything, but actually Julia struggled with one problem in geometry, so she didn't solve it, and she ended up being the second. So later she came to me and asked if I am that person who was the first. Well, I say, yeah, and where are you from, and so on and so forth. Yeah, she said that she's from Kharkiv.
Even though they didn't get into the same class, Alina and Yulia quickly became friends and spent a lot of time together.
She always had a lot of energy to do some crazy things. She always had a lot of interesting ideas what to do and how to do it. Even going for groceries was always interesting with her because she could suddenly start running and I had to join it. Otherwise, I wouldn't be able to catch up with her. Or sometimes she would just stop a lamppost and tell me that she can't continue walking because there's an obstacle on her way. Or sometimes she could just suddenly shout, "Watch out, wall!" and just push you into the wall in a corridor.
Again, as I imagine Yulia pushing a friend into the corridor wall, I can't help thinking of a Harry Potter analogy, just like a platform 9 3/4. And just as the friends at Hogwarts, Alina and Yulia used to visit each other over school holidays.
Yeah, when we were 16, she invited me to live at her family's place in Kharkiv. And I also remember one night when we just spent that whole night watching anime, a series called No Game, No Life. It's about two teenagers who were rather socially awkward and kind of confused what to do with real life, but they were really good at winning games, all types of games, computer games and any other. So they suddenly get into the world where there is no war and any conflict can be resolved by playing a game. And the point is they they made some friends there, and slowly, step by step, they won that whole kingdom and started ruling that world.
For these teenagers, that was a magical world where they felt they belonged. As I listened to their story, I think that for Yulia, the world of math and coding was a comfortable environment with clear structure and rules. She was very good at STEM. In the last year of high school, Yulia, as a member of the Ukrainian team, won the first prize in European female math competition, and Yulia also won a silver medal as an individual contestant there. By the way, here's an example of the problems she enjoyed solving so much.
Okay, so imagine you and your friend are playing a game, and your friend thought of a number, either 1, 2, or 3, one of those. And you are allowed to ask only one question. The friend will answer yes, no, or I don't know. And so after his reply, you'll have to say what exactly his number was. Again, you have only one try.
I'm not giving out the solution right now, but I will at the end of the episode. Pause now if you want to give it a thought, and be aware that the solution is strict, formal, and beautiful. As Alina told me that year at another competition, Yulia couldn't solve 2 of the easier problems, once again, but had managed to figure out 2 of the hardest ones that almost no one had solved. Then by accident she got an extra point at that contest, which she immediately appealed.
Usually at the Olympiads, problems are in the order from the easiest to the hardest, but Yulia never cared about that. And a good example of it is that in 2017, our last year of high school, she solved 2 hardest problems which nobody else solved, but she didn't solve 2 easiest ones. And so when everybody had scored 7700, well, she also had 14 points, but she had 0077. Also, at that very Olympiad, they gave her 1 extra point because the jury was inattentive, but she came and asked to appeal it and asked to appeal it to 1 point down. And later, at the awarding ceremony, she didn't get any prize because she didn't score eventually enough points for the prize, but they awarded her with headphones and said that this is for fair play. And she was very proud of it.
This respect for fair play, I think, tells so much about Yulia's personality. Even more than for being a quite literal genius, she was known for speaking up against any kind of injustice against herself, but especially against other people.
For example, at high school, one time it was cold in the classroom, and one student wanted to sit in a court, but the teacher said that it's not allowed. And Yulia started arguing about that and wants the right for that friend to stay in her court. And in general, it was not just about injustice. When there was something inconvenient and an action was needed, she would always go and say something, try to change it. One time, even, there was a situation after which one classmate said, "Zdanovskaya, stop your revolution."
These are the stories from Yulia's high school years. All that time, from 2014 to 2016, the world outside of her school was anything but magic. In eastern Ukraine, the war went on. It was a proxy war which Russia was wedging up on Ukraine, and as a result, many people fled the region. In 2014, Yulia's parents decided to join an NGO called Kharkiv Station to help the refugees from eastern Ukraine who made it to Kharkiv. Yulia used to join them. She helped to entertain the refugees' children. This was the reality in which Yulia grew up. In 2017, Yulia and Alina got accepted into the best math program in the country at Kyiv State University. Yulia didn't lose her 2 main features, that of being a prodigy and always willing, as Alina says, to start a revolution. And occasionally, there were the situations where she would need to be a combination of those.
So when we were studying at the university, there was a really bad computer science teacher who demanded from us to know a lot, but couldn't explain anything well, and himself did a lot of mistakes. And usually people just couldn't do anything about him because he would just ask you something you don't know and you wouldn't be able to answer, and he would just put a bad grade. But this couldn't work with Yulia because she followed his lecture very carefully, and she noticed every smallest mistake, and she started asking about it, pointed it out, and asking what he can say about it, and he didn't know what to answer. And after 2-3 minutes, she would answer, and he continued. So after several weeks, he got really angry and after the lesson, told her individually that she can get an individual project which she will have to show in the end of the semester, but she knows everything well and doesn't need to attend his lectures anymore.
Luckily, not all of Yulia's professors were like that. In general, student life can be quite similar to high school. First you do all these homeworks, then you take a test and get your grades. But however, there is something special that only a really good university education can give you. You need to get yourself in the environment of a real scientific discovery, where people search for solutions to the actual problems that are not yet solved. This makes a huge impact later on. It defines who you become as a scientist and as a person.
I'm Andrey Bondarenko. I'm associated professor in the Norwegian University of Science and Technology. It's in Norway, in Trondheim. So I'm working in mathematical department basically, and my research interest is combinatorics, analysis, graph theory, number theory, and some other areas as well.
As a sophomore, Yulia attended a seminar held by a guest professor from Norway. It was a very important moment, first encounter with actual contemporary mathematics. Professor Bondarenko was immediately impressed by her outstanding level.
Well, it happens in December of 2018, and she was one of the students there. Well, she basically impressed me because she was the strongest student in the class, and I was really impressed of her knowledge, by her knowledge of linear algebra. It was a pleasure to see that a student understands the lecture so well and can give so adequate feedback. So after this, I invite her for undergraduate student project to my university.
Yulia was extremely happy about that upcoming trip. She was anticipating to see the northern lights, the aurora. And also she was wondering if she needs to take her special gadget, a snowball maker, with her.
We worked together during a week on a conjecture of Erdős in graph theory. Conjecture says basically that in arbitrary graph of with degree of each vertex at least 3, there is a simple cycle of lengths which is power of 2, like 4, 8, 16, 32.
Let's briefly talk about what they were trying to prove there. The kind of mathematics we're used to actually deals with the so-called continuums. That means that you can squeeze an infinite amount of numbers between any two given numbers. Let's say between 4 and 5, there is 4.5, but then between 4.5 and 5, you can also put 4.75, and so on, and it never ends. But there is a different kind of mathematics out there that deals with discrete objects, with nothing between them. One type of such objects is called graphs. It is easy to imagine what graphs are if we take, let's say, a country with a lot of cities that are connected by roads. Each city has got no fewer than 3 roads coming out of it, and each road can only be taken once in one direction. So that mathematical abstraction is a graph. And also there are so-called cycles. Cycles are itineraries, which would include you starting from any one given city, visiting several cities, and then returning to the original city. That's a cycle. So the yet unsolved problem which Yulia and Andrey spent time working on is called Erdős-Gyárfás conjecture, and it appeared about 30 years ago. You can imagine it like that. For any country with an indefinite number of cities, you can always find a cycle that can be fulfilled in the amount of steps that would equal a power of 2. Let me unpack this. So no matter how many cities there are, no matter how peculiar the branching road pattern would be, you will always find a cycle that can be completed within either 2 or 4 or 8 or 16, etc. steps. So in Wikipedia you can find some beautiful pictures illustrating this. To me they look a bit like frosted window patterns. And then you have a bunch of mathematicians saying, okay, let's see, this graph doesn't contain any 4 or 8 steps cycle, but it does have one cycle of 16 steps. And they are writing a code that searches for solutions for various types of maths. But there is still no general solution to that problem, no proof of that conjecture for an indefinite amount of cities. Why should we care? Well, theory of graphs is an important source of applications for all spheres of life, ranging from programming to geometry, from optimization of logistics for actual trains, up to the all-important question about what shape of polygonal tiles you can use to stitch up a football. Professor Bondarenko says that Yulia was a source of inspiration for him, but they didn't have time to accomplish much.
It was a pure inspiration for me. I mean, it was a dark winter in Trondheim. She was so bright person, you know. We was in the forest. We go to the river, you know. We did all these nice things that you can do in Norway. This conjecture is known as a very hard, but I just explain it to her as an example of good conjecture with simple formulation and which is really hard to attack. And she already showed me some of her beautiful ideas. These ideas might be pursued further, but unfortunately, Yulia didn't have much time for doing hard research because her true love was teaching.
And now this is the most interesting part. Several people I spoke to told me that Yulia Zdanovskaya had never been satisfied with just comprehending some very difficult and complex thing, just solving a problem on her own. Once this was done, and usually this was done very quickly, she would have a strong urge to up this game. She would long for an intellectual challenge of the next level. Yulia would need to turn that bulky and incomprehensible thing into something short and simple, to find a way to explain this to someone who struggled with it. She got mad when she saw people cheating at the exams. This violated her sense of the world harmony. It was terribly important for her to not just think, but more importantly, to think about how other people think. So during her high school years, Yulia became passionate about teaching programming to children. Here she explains her motives, plain and simple.
I had to teach somebody something. I would show them how to turn a sphere inside out. So why would I do that? First, because I like to blow people's mind. I mean, it's not a real thing. You cannot really do this without cutting a sphere or something like that. It's like a thought experiment, something like that. It is really beautiful and really mind-blowing, and when people will see that, I hope they would be interested really, and then I'll tell them that it's like topology, part of math, and then maybe they will be really interested in math. They would stop thinking that math is boring and understand that math is really cool and really, really interesting, and then they will become mathematicians, and the more mathematicians we have, the better our world, the better place is our world.
So the more people understand how to turn the sphere inside out, the better place this world will be.
No matter what Yulia was doing, she was really involved into it and really devoted to it. A good example of this is when she was preparing for a programming lesson, and the thing with programming problems is that you solve them, you write the code, and then you submit your solution. But the computer itself can't check whether it's correct or not. It just runs your program on a set of random numbers, and then we have to assume that if it works well for those numbers, then the solution is correct and would work for any number. But that set of random numbers has to be well chosen, and somebody, a teacher, has to write beforehand a program to generate them. So that's what she was doing, and something didn't work, she struggled a lot and got really tired. So eventually she fell asleep and didn't even change her clothes or turn off the laptop. just fell asleep. And sometime later, I hear some strange sounds from her, something like, And I thought she already woke up, so I asked her, "Hey, what happened?" And, well, she replies, "The program doesn't generate tests." And that was the moment I realized she was still sleeping, but even in her dreams, she kept working on that program and trying to fix it.
Teaching younger kids is actually a big thing in Yulia's environment. That's how the science community has been reproducing and cultivating itself for decades all over the post-Soviet space. That's especially true for the mathematicians and computer scientists. The entire life at such schools revolves around science competitions that grant enrollment in top university programs, therefore ensuring one's future. And very often, first-year students or even high schoolers start teaching and training younger pupils for these contests. They share their very recent experience and their own gained knowledge. So right after Yulia became a student, she started a very high-profile program in computer science for gifted school children in Kiev at an education center called Quanta. She ran it for 4 years. This would include summer camps where she would be active 24/7, either teaching or playing with children or preparing tasks for the next day. People remember her as a person who was fun to be around. Yulia never missed a chance of a soccer game or a table tennis competition, or most importantly, to fool around in her inimitable Lewis Carroll style. All that, the snowy Norway and its northern lights, the summer camps with table tennis and soccer, imaginary country map with graph theory, all that still reminds me of some magical world, full of beauty and order, full of harmony and rules. But eventually, Yulia Zdanovskaya has started to recognize herself more and more as a citizen of an actual real country. Her country, Ukraine. In 2021, Yulia graduated. Several people recall that at the graduation ceremony, she was jokingly greeted with an idea that she should soon become a Harvard professor. Yulia replied quite seriously that she didn't want that, but she might consider the post of the Minister of Education. By that time, Yulia had already made a decision to make her next step. She didn't want to teach gifted children at the capital anymore. Yulia decided to join a program called Teach for Ukraine, where graduates of the best universities are being sent to teach at rural schools in small towns for 2 years. And our next guest tells us about this chapter of Yulia's life.
One of the most important motivations for this move was the fact that really people in villages and in small towns are not privileged to get the best education. That was hard to watch for her. That only a few hundreds of kids really get the best programming, math, physics. Well, for her, it's mostly programming and math education.
This is Yulia's close friend, Vasilina Borysyuk. They first met right after Yulia had finished high school. Vasilina was only 1 year junior, but Yulia was already giving her some coding classes at a summer camp. And then, that same year, Yulia recruited Vasilina to teach. Yulia was already starting her computer science program for gifted children at Quanta, and this is where they worked together for 4 years. Vasilina agreed to talk to me, but only on condition that we don't speak Russian, which otherwise would be the most natural choice, since we both are native speakers. Vasilina has told me that Yulia was brought up in a Russian-speaking family, but she switched to strictly Ukrainian in the past few years. This was important for Yulia, so Vasilina refused to discuss Yulia's life in the same language that is spoken by the people who took it. Last year in September, Vasilina visited Yulia in a small town named Yuryevka, where she was teaching at a rural school.
She was teaching, informatics for kids, so it's more than just programming. It's using Google Docs, it's using everyday tech. She was still struggling to remember all the kids, but it's... give me a second, I'm just talking too much, I'm sorry.
This was a very different type of teaching. Instead of dealing with gifted children and advanced problems, Yulia was giving her pupils and occasionally her colleagues some basics in computer literacy, using Google Documents and such. She had trouble memorizing all the pupils' names just because she was the only teacher of computer science for the entire school, so that was like 200 or 300 pupils. That was an ordinary post-Soviet school, burdened by all the bureaucracy, planning, logs. So Yulia set herself a goal. She wanted to change the system, the workflow, to come up with solutions that would let everyone concentrate on actual teaching instead of paperwork.
And one thing is that classical school, not like side classes, but a normal school, still has a lot of bureaucracy, still has a lot of papers to fill, still has a lot of work that teachers don't really have to do. That is not really a teacher's work. And one thing we talked a lot about is how to automatize all this and how to bring some ready solutions to all this stuff. That was one of her main goals, to at least get rid of piles of papers, which take too much time and bring no good. And one of the mega tasks was to get rid of the boring stuff, to spend all time with actual lessons and with actual kids and not with long grade journal.
Vasilina and Yulia spent a few days together in Yurivka and then went to Kiev to attend a rave party. That was fun. Vasilina stayed in Kiev and Yulia went back to her small-town school. Since then, they saw each other several more times over weekends. On February 24th, on Thursday, Vasilina woke up at 4:30 a.m. in Kiev to the sounds of the first Russian rocket attacks. Vasilina called all her friends, including Yulia, and woke them up.
During the first day, it was the only way to mentally survive, was to talk to everyone non-stop. At 24th, I woke up from explosion sounds. I knew that it's probably the war starting, and I decided to call all my friends, to call my closest ones, to wake them up. So I actually woke her up at like 5 a.m. 24th. And from that on, we were chatting through 24th, 25th, because that made situation easier to live through. And even if you're in a relatively safe place, as I was, at least I was not in Kharkiv, at least I was not 20 kilometers from Russian Federation.
Vasilina says that the only way to stay sane for them was to constantly talk everything over with one another. They were trying to figure out what was going on and what is going to happen next.
And during the first days, all of us discussed and agreed that if we win this, or when we win this, if we survive through this, when we survive through this, and when we would finally defend our country one more time, this would be the country we'd like to pay taxes to. This would be the country we'd like to work for. Because at least we know that there are a lot of people who don't see this country as just a piece of land. We were prescribed. We knew that there are a lot of people who feel connection with this piece of land and who are ready to sacrifice a lot for this piece of land to stay ours, with our people, with our traditions, and to develop our own way.
For me, this was a real goosebump moment in our interview. I was listening to what Vasilina was saying, and I was thinking that many people in Russia, right in those early hours of February 24th, on that goddamn Thursday, mathematicians and teachers, people like Yulia or like me, some very similar people came to the exact opposite conclusions. I was woken up to that news by my wife. She was saying that Putin was shelling major cities in Ukraine. I immediately felt that the country where I lived and worked, where I had lots of hopes, that country was dead, as are all the hopes for its future. I took my entire family and fled within a few days. We left that piece of land that we were ascribed to by birth.
You know, among all of the people from my closest circle, she went the most far. She was the one who would not just wait for the victory, but would be eager to do something for it. And now the motivation to be in Kharkiv was because she feels more ties with Kharkiv than with Yurivka, because, she was born in Kharkiv, she was raised in Kharkiv. I remember very well the phrase from message, "I'm really not okay if Kharkiv is taken."
So Yulia left her small town school and came to her mother town, Kharkiv. This is the second biggest city in Ukraine, very green, with vibrant cultural life and lots of scientific institutions. Yulia joined the Territorial Defense Group as a volunteer. She literally moved into the city administration building. Yulia told Vasilina that she just couldn't stay home when Kharkiv became one of the main targets for Russian attacks. In one of her messages that she has sent to her parents, she's saying in her usual playful manner that she has reached that city administration building safely and is about to find out what's what out there. She never came back. All those last days, Yulia kept chatting with Vasilina. She was telling her friend all about life at that volunteer center.
I knew that there was a spectrum of tasks, starting from cooking food and wiping the floor and ending with really real warfare tasks. And I don't know which particular, but I know that she wasn't doing the first, just because everyone was pushing women to do this. And she was not okay with everyone pushing women to do this. And she didn't do the least because she was just not qualified to do real war tasks with like a machine gun. I think like carrying something all over, like I know that a lot of volunteers do the nets, do the masking nets. So maybe it could be something like this, especially after March 2nd, when the square near Hoda was hit. I think the work entailed bringing a lot of, building cracks. And she was mad. I remember the text that she's mad that she don't have enough muscle to bring, for example, a large concrete shard. On the contrary to what's going on around, our chat was like a safe place where we could talk about nasty men who make girls cook food and not do anything else. About myself, I'm afraid about you. You're on the road. You will be in the car. You won't be protected. And I'm like, I'm not afraid about me. I'm on a run on Western Ukraine. And you are like under the threat of constant shelling. So I'm more afraid about you and you're more afraid about me. We laughed about it.
Shelling was constant. Sirens were everywhere. Yulia would casually refer to them with a swear word, "Yeboshit." They are fucking shooting at us. It would become as casual as sending a meme.
She wouldn't even tell me about the precise shellings and bombings of Kharkiv center because it was Kharkiv and it is Kharkiv everyday life. I was on a run during all March 2nd and March 3rd. So we would just, during all the day of March 2nd and March 3rd, we would just call each other hour and just talk about weather, about the guys I meet on the road signs I see. She would tell me about some sweets that someone would bring them. She would tell me about So the chats were about road signs, about their talks there in Hoda. She would text me about talking about gay rights there with the people. She would text me about talking of programming. She would text me about talking of feminism, politics.
And Vasilina would share with Yulia her own road story. She has almost reached the Polish border, but she was sure that it's not safe, that Russians would get her even there.
I was scared. I was afraid of the worst scenarios. I was texting her that, what if we all die? What if everything is much worse than I think? And our army won't let them. I was panicking every other day just because it's war, that western regions of Ukraine would be shelled as well. And there would be fighting in western regions, which are important now and which are supplying a lot and which felt safe then, I was afraid that they would be touched as hard as Kharkiv as well. And she answered me, він не може туди дійти, бо наша армія йому не дає. Which means they can't reach there because our army won't let them.
And this is her very last message.
Ми не маємо часу зараз переконувати тебе, що не треба кудись близько їхати. От, да, обстріляли.
Yulia is saying that she has no time to explain to Vasilina why Vasilina doesn't need to run any further, because her own building, Yulia's building, has just gotten heavily shelled.
Yeah, I read my message. I said that, well, okay, maybe you're right. Maybe reading the news doesn't affect me in the best way. She read that, and then all the other messages are left unread. She wasn't online, but knowing that she's the person who could forget her phone somewhere, she's the person that can be out of reach for a few hours, and that's okay. I didn't really care because, you know, it's an everyday situation. She has a work to do there. She's probably busy with something more important than chatting about gay rights in private messages. And after a day or two, I'm like, okay, having lost your phone and connection for a day is okay under these circumstances, but for 3 days, already feels suspicious. I wasn't afraid about her this whole time, just because she's always in some dangerous situations and she's always safe and sound. And how can I be afraid of the person who can climb the ladder of 5-story building and don't care? How can I be afraid of the person who would, sit on the railing of a boat in the storm? And, you know, being afraid about people like this is not really productive because you just know that they would be safe and sound. But well, turns out it's not the case. And then in the morning of March 7th, I get a text from her mom. Well, that's it. Well, of course, I had my reaction, but now it's not about me. It's about what's happening, and that even the people who are always safe and sound and who fight for the brightest ideas still, you know, get affected.
I asked Vasilina if she knows exactly what happened to Yulia.
I'm not ready to know any details. You know, the life of a lot of people who are safe now, but who already got some grief on their souls, I think has one common feature, is that we build a wall between us and reality. Even if, you know, I'm safe here and I don't have any direct threats on me, but I've built a wall between myself and reality because as soon as I enter in reality, I think my nerves would collapse, you know, by just hearing the stories of particular people, imagining these people and imagining that they're taken by the actions of Russian army. On one hand, and on the other hand, someone would hear the stories of great people, would imagine what impact their work may have on the peaceful times, and then again, imagine that their lives are being taken and the greatest perspectives of Ukraine, Europe, world, universe are being taken by Russian army. They cannot take everything. They would not take everything, but I want people to just imagine this loss.
Since Yulia's death, Russian rocket attacks destroyed more than 2,000 buildings in Kharkiv, including schools, hospitals, but mainly residential buildings. Untold number of civilians died under those bombings. Station Kharkiv, an NGO where Yulia's parents are still working, is still helping people to survive in the city. You can help them too. We have put the banking details in the description of this episode. Quanta, an education center for gifted kids in Kiev, where Yulia worked during her college years, cannot do any offline classes now due to war, but they have started free online classes for anyone who wants to join. This program is called Let's Get Distracted. You can help them too. The MIT started a special free math enrichment and research program for exceptional high school students from Ukraine. It's called Yulia's Dream, after Yulia Zdanovskaya. On this program, students will meet online once a week in small groups to study advanced math topics beyond high school curriculum or work on math research projects under the guidance of academic mentors from among MIT Math Department graduate students and MIT math majors. The instruction will be available in Ukrainian, English, and Russian. And the solution to the problem in the beginning of this podcast is the following. You should just tell your friend that you have also guessed a number and that your number is bigger than 1.5 and smaller than 2.5. And then you just need to ask one question. It should go like this. Is your number bigger than mine? And that was your Naked Mole Rat podcast by Liba Studio. I would like to thank my editor, Andrey Borzenko, for his contribution, and Julia K. for her help with English. I'm Ilya Kolmanovsky. Goodbye.